Hello and welcome to the Cass Health Podcast, the show where we hope to connect our community with healthcare information that's relatable, understandable, and useful to your life, and where you get to know better the neighbors providing your care here. I'm your host, Ann McCurdy, and in today's episode, we're talking with our guests Karmen Roland and Kacey Peterson from our Senior Life Solutions team. Before we get started, 2 quick disclaimers. First, the comments in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of Cass Health. Second, the information in this podcast is not intended to be construed as personal medical advice. Always consult your primary care provider with your questions and concerns regarding your health. So to get started, we'll have Kacey and Karmen, if you can both introduce yourselves and tell us what you do at Cass Health.
Hi, I'm Karmen Roland. I'm a registered nurse here at Cass Health and also the registered nurse and program director for the Senior Life Solutions program.
I am Kacey Peterson, and I am a licensed mental health counselor, and I am the program therapist for Senior Life Solutions here at Cass Health.
Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. We have a really important topic to discuss. September is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month, and we have some things we're going to talk about and some really good takeaways for our listeners, too. So first, let's get into why is it so important for us to talk about suicide and suicide awareness and prevention?
Well, suicide is definitely a difficult topic for people to discuss and even bring up. For us, we like to get out there in the community and educate everyone as to why it is important to talk about these things and to try to break that stigma to it and to try to help those get the help that they need. So according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, there's an average of 130 suicide deaths per day, and that's a lot of people. And also in the year 2020 alone, they actually found that there was 1.2 million suicide attempts. So I'm sure that that number has increased since then. We're here to actually get out in the community and to help people across the country to help them be aware of suicide and suicide awareness and educate them and help them learn about resources out there and the things that they can do to help each other.
So, Karmen, what makes people more at risk for suicide?
Especially with us here in rural Iowa, because we have a lot of people that are on farms and isolated and things like that. We want to make sure that you understand that in our rural areas, it's actually double the amount of suicide attempts and suicide deaths than there is in urban areas. Also, our farmers are at huge risk for that due to the isolation factor and the stress factor with finances in the farm. And then also our greatest risk is for our men 85 and above, believe it or not. The suicide among older adults is actually very high as well. Men compared with women, men are more likely to actually complete a suicide where women have more attempts. Those, like I said earlier, age 85 and older are actually at highest risk. White adults compared to other races are more susceptible to having attempts and suicide deaths. Our LGBTQ adults absolutely are at higher risk. Discrimination, victimization, trauma, all those kinds of things, sexual abuse, anything that they've experienced that is traumatic events for them can actually put them at higher risk as well. And then we also want to make sure that we recognize the fact that our veterans, especially in our rural areas, are extremely high risk. They actually say that there's an average of 22 per day.
Wow, that's just astonishing how high that number is. And again, so important for us to talk about these things so maybe we can impact those numbers. And to be clear, just living in a rural area increases our risk. So
Absolutely.
So that's everyone in Cass County. Right. That's everyone in those counties around us.
Yes.
Like just by living in this rural area, like you have to be aware that you, your neighbor, friends, family, we're all at a higher risk.
And part of that comes from the access to mental health care as well. And so Iowa is well known for provider shortages. In many of our counties across Iowa, there is not enough access to mental health care, and so that contributes to the risk. Also, some of the risk factors that come with just in general, but also especially in these rural areas, risk factors among, as Karmen was saying, older adults, but individuals that are already struggling with depression, individuals that have had previous attempts, any substance use problems. And we know substance use is a problem everywhere, but especially in our rural areas, we're seeing that impact more and more prevalent. And, chronic pain, physical illness, just declining in your day-to-day functioning, not being able to do the things that you used to be able to do, especially for those older populations. Disability, family conflicts and loss, a history of suicide or a history of depression in the family, and social isolation, which is also something that we see in the rural areas as being much more prevalent because you're more separated from your neighbors. And so it's that much more important that we're checking on our neighbors, that we're checking on our family members, and that we're having these discussions and bringing awareness to this. Also, dementia and other forms of impaired cognitive ability have also been linked with suicidal behavior in older adults. And, one last thing that I'd like to note here, the recorded suicide attempts among older adults are usually more lethal than those among younger populations, specifically because older adults are nearly twice as likely to use a firearm as a means of suicide, which we know is much more effective or can be much more effective than other means of suicide. And when you think about the rural areas, the likelihood that someone will own a firearm or have a firearm in the home in rural areas is much higher than it is in urban areas.
So let's talk a little bit about the warning signs. Tell me more about those signs that may develop in someone who is considering suicide.
So there's many different ways that people can present themselves as having red flags to being suicidal. And some of them are actual verbal things that they can talk about. And, they might say, like, I just feel like I'm such a burden. I don't want to be here any longer. I just want to go to sleep and not wake up again.
And then do they intend to do it? So it's not just I have a plan to do it, but yeah, I intend to do it on my wife's birthday tomorrow, or I intend to do it on, the anniversary of this person's death, or I intend to do it, the second you leave. And they're oftentimes not gonna, perhaps be completely honest with you about that because they intend to do it and they know you're gonna try to stop them from doing it. But
they might come out and say something like, I can't bear another Christmas without her.
Yes.
So right then and there that if you've already found out that they've got a plan in place, and you're talking about intent, and then they start talking about, I just can't bear another Christmas without her.
Right.
It's going to happen between now and then.
Yes, and bringing up the holiday, holidays are a hard time. Those first anniversaries, those that first year, especially after a loss, is a really difficult time. Anytime, major sort of disruption in life functioning has happened, so somebody is... we think about taking someone's license away. Even, they lose their ability to drive, even if they weren't really driving before. Those little symbols of freedom and independence are important.
Retirement.
And
that lack of purpose in life.
So retirement, we know, goes through phases. The first phase, and especially if it's a forced retirement, you skip right over the honeymoon phase and the vacation phase, and you go right into it's really kind of loss and lost. And so suddenly you've lost a sense of purpose, you've lost your routine, you've lost maybe a lot of your connection with people had to do with the job you were at. You just feel lost. And, this is also the time when, suddenly we're waking up and it's like, now what? What do I do with myself now? And so there's a lot of trial and error that comes in that second phase of retirement where I'm trying to find my way and I'm trying to figure out how am I going to spend my time, and then it's just a lot of times people get stuck. And when people get stuck, that can lead to depression. And so I think recognizing that when people go through those major life changes, they're more likely to be at risk. It's not always a factor, but certainly they're more at risk. And just making sure that, when we know that somebody is moving into, as Karmen said, one of those trigger moments, winter is a big trigger for a lot of depression, seasonal depression in people. Winter's hard. You're isolated more. You can't get outside. You don't get that sun. being in nature is very therapeutic, especially for older folks. They like to garden, they like to plant flowers. They lose that ability in the middle of winter, and they also don't feel comfortable driving sometimes in winter. There's more of a risk of, falling, and so they don't go out as much. And I think just making sure that during those trigger times, we're really amping up our contact with people to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to keep people safe.
These are all things that, they might actually tell you they want to commit suicide or they want to kill themselves. And these are things that, people will hear, but there's a lot of things that they will do in their behaviors that might be warning signs as well that we don't even recognize. So always be aware of things such as, maybe they're isolating more. They're giving away their valuables and their possessions to family members and loved ones. Writing letters to people, more or less saying goodbye, giving them phone calls, and telling them goodbye in their own way that way. Maybe they start hoarding their medications or purchasing firearms. The one thing that a lot of people that really kind of throws them off is what we call the calm. And this is where beforehand that person actually becomes calm and seems happy and seems like everything's okay, and then all of a sudden they take their life. But it's a lot of times because they've come to that decision that I'm going to do it, so they've actually lifted a burden from their shoulders, and so then they can be happy about it.
And a lot of times it will feel light. They'll feel lighter. The energy of that person will feel lighter. And so, family members who maybe even do suspect that something has been off will often feel relieved because they think the person is getting better. They think the person has, turned the corner. And the reality is that, as Karmen said, that person has just made that decision. And so it's that burden being lifted off of them that really is causing that lightness.
When we talk about the number of suicides and suicide attempts, those numbers aren't always accurate either because of some other factors. So, Kacey, can you tell us a little bit more why those numbers might be a little underreported?
Right. So, first of all, not all states report in suicide numbers, Iowa being one of those states, to the national level. And so a lot of these statistics are based on a small number of states that are actually reporting this information. But also we know that in the rural areas, oftentimes suicides, especially in farming communities, are chalked up to farming accidents. You also have, especially with older adults, exhibiting passive self-harm behaviors that result in death, like refusing food, medications, or liquids, and those are rarely recorded as suicide attempts or as suicide deaths. So the numbers definitely are not reflecting, how many people are actually following through with suicide or making these attempts. And just to kind of go back to the risk factors for a moment too, executive functioning. And so a lot of times the folks that are actually successfully completing suicide are folks that you would not think are at risk for suicide. And so it's often coming as a shock to the community, a shock to family members. These are folks who are sometimes in high-powered jobs, sometimes who, just at face put on a very good kind of show as far as everything's fine, everything is going well, and behind the scenes, that's not the case. And so, just because somebody looks like they're doing well does not mean that they're not at risk for suicide, which is why it's all the more important to talk to our family members and talk to our friends in the community and to ask how people are doing.
Just like we would talk about if someone was recently diagnosed with diabetes or heart disease or any other illness, we talk about those things. We talk about here are the lifestyle changes I'm making and I need your support on, or we talk about those symptoms I was experiencing. So when we say risk factors and warning signs, we're also talking about symptoms,
right.
And I think maybe just even changing some of that language that we use around it helps people be okay talking
right.
about these things for themselves, and talking about those things for their loved ones, saying hey, I've noticed some symptoms in you recently.
Right.
That, the language matters, right?
Absolutely.
And for making us comfortable talking about it.
Absolutely. And people are more likely to reach out to their doctor. People are more likely to reach out to a friend who has had a similar physical symptom. And it's also important that we recognize that a lot of times, mental health can take on a physical manifestation in the body. And so mental health does impact your physical symptoms. It does impact your heart rate. It can affect your blood pressure. It can affect your diabetes. And it can lead to stroke and heart attacks and physical pain, muscle aches and muscle tension and pain. And so a lot of times, folks that are going to the doctor are not going to the doctor to talk about their mental illness or their mental health. They're going to the doctor to talk about these physical manifestations that happen to be associated with their mental health. And when they aren't able to get the answers that they want as far as a physical cause for their physical ailments, it does leave them questioning it, could this really be due to anxiety? And so a lot of times just that stigma alone prevents people from doing anything once they do find out that there's not really anything physically wrong with them, but this might be related to high stress, or this might be related to chronic stress, or major life changes, or just, kind of swallowing our emotions for years and staying busy instead of thinking about the things that are bothering us and putting things off.
And a lot of times that goes right back to the stigma of it all.
Absolutely.
Because they're more willing to go to the doctor, like you said, Kacey, that they'll go to the doctor to check their diabetes. They'll go to the doctor if they have cancer or heart conditions. And these are all, organs of our body that are being taken care of by our physicians. But what they don't realize is that our brain and our mental health, which is a part of our brain and our brain function, is also another organ of our body. But people don't look at it that way. But we need to start looking at it that way, because there are treatments out there. You go to a cardiologist and get put on blood pressure medication for high blood pressure. Well, if you're experiencing severe depression or anxiety that's leading to suicidal thoughts especially, there's medications out there that can help with that as well, just like any other organ of the body. So we need to kind of reframe the way we look at things and how we are viewing mental health, because honestly, we all have mental health. It's not, this person or that person, or, that, schizophrenia, bipolar, all those things that we think about when we think of mental illness. Mental illness and mental health are, yes, similar, but very different.
And as Karmen said, the brain is an organ. And so just as your, things can go wrong with your organs, in other parts of the body, things can go wrong with your brain. And I think recognizing, too, that, having mental health is just like having blood pressure. It's like having a heart rate. It's like, or a heartbeat.
We all have these things.
We all have these things.
Right.
And so it's really important to take care of those things. And also just to recognize that as far as those risk factors go, if you, folks that are going through cancer, that's hard. Folks who are facing, physical limitations, your relative falls and now all of a sudden, they aren't able to get around like they used to. That would be depressing for anyone. That would be hard for anyone to accept. And, that's not always just with older populations, but, when it comes to your mental health, addressing these factors actually helps you heal faster. It helps you recover faster when you go through surgery or when you're going through chemotherapy. So even though your mental health may not be causing some of these physical ailments, although it certainly can cause high blood pressure and cause cortisol levels and glucose levels to be off. It absolutely acts as as something that can exacerbate something that's already there. And so you have a pinched nerve, you get stressed out, you get muscle tension when you get stressed out, and automatically that's exacerbating that symptom, and that's making that feel worse for you. And so when suddenly something happens and there's really no physical change in the body or no identifiable trigger for that happening, considering mental health is, a logical place to go with that, especially just given the stressors of daily life anymore.
So what works? What can we do to help prevent suicides?
So there are several interventions that are proved effective at preventing suicide and reducing risk factors, especially among older adults. And as Karmen said, that's a population that's definitely more at risk. Just primary care interventions, using your care coordinator, going to your primary care doctor, and being honest, being open. Doctors and hospitals like Cass Health are doing a fantastic job at trying to screen for more mental health related issues, and so they're asking questions that in the past we haven't asked folks. And there's simple questions, just 1 or 2, 3 questions. That's all it takes to really determine if somebody is struggling in these ways, and there might be something else that we can kind of look into, or some more factors that we need to consider. Also, the pandemic, one of the blessings of the pandemic was that it opened the doors for more telehealth opportunities. So access to care became something that was more widely available through telehealth capabilities. And we've shown that telehealth is just as effective as face-to-face interactions. Now, some people prefer the face-to-face interactions, but when you're facing a provider shortage and you need to get someone some help, or it's short-term, maybe someone just has a real identifiable stressor, a major loss that they've experienced, or they've just been diagnosed with cancer, and maybe they're having a hard time kind of reconciling that. Even just solution focus, some brief touch base with a therapist over the phone can be very effective, especially among women. It shows very effective in reducing symptoms, and then you're getting ahead of it so it doesn't become something that's so chronic. Education, just general education, making sure that we are doing things like this, that we're having these conversations, that organizations like Cass Health are getting out there and bringing awareness to this, and that our providers are aware of the impact that mental health has on physical health, so that they can have those conversations with their patients, so that we can have those conversations with our neighbors and our relatives, because this is an issue for all of us. This is not just on the shoulders of our providers or of our mental health community. This is all of us. And so coming together, making sure that we're engaged in community activities that also improve resilience. So let's be more proactive than reactive. Let's teach coping skills in our schools, and let's talk about how we cope with stress. Let's recognize that everybody experiences stress, and that we all have a stress response in the body, and when that stress response is activated, when it goes into overload because we are not dealing with our stress, that really has a toll that it takes on the body. And so recognizing those things, and then also just various clinical treatments that mental health providers can offer that are oftentimes, it's not a lifelong thing. You don't have to, when you go to therapy, you don't have to expect that to be a lifelong process. It shouldn't be a lifelong process. And so, for most people, it might just be several weeks until they're able to work through things. For some people, they do need it for a little bit longer. And, whatever that looks like, I think being open to having those conversations and recognizing that you don't have to feel like this forever, that there is help. And, coming in and getting treatment and bringing this to the attention of your doctor, or seeking out that help, people sometimes look at that as a sign of weakness, but really, that takes a lot of courage, that takes a lot of bravery, and I think it takes a lot of strength, and in the end, you'll be more resilient and able to deal with stressors and change.
I love how you said that, it's on all of us, to have awareness. And we think about our slogan, neighbors caring for neighbors. And in this rural area, it really comes down to that,
Absolutely.
and, being able and willing to check in on your friends and families and neighbors, right. And just recognizing those risk factors in each other, and talking about it.
Right. And we all know, what it feels like to be lonely. We all know what it feels like to, struggle at times. And so, you're not alone in this. And I think we have a way of convincing ourselves that we are the only ones going through this, and we're not. And so when you speak up, when you ask, you can say, hey, I recognize that, I know when this happened to me, I struggled a little bit. How are you doing? Those kinds of things.
So the Be the One to campaign was initiated by the 988 and the Suicide Crisis Lifeline. It's a really neat campaign. And the Be the One to campaign has kind of 5 steps that we want to talk about today. So that first step is ask. So Karmen, can you talk to us a little bit about what does that mean? What does it mean to ask?
It's basically what it says is don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, and a lot of people, they have a hard time with asking those questions about suicide because it's something that they don't want to talk about.
It's uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable for them, and they don't know how to approach it if they feel somebody might be struggling. But the thing to do is to be very direct.
Right.
Just absolutely just open up and ask, do you feel like you're going to kill yourself? and to, you know, ask all those questions about it. Like, you know, do you have a plan? Are you taking things, hoarding things, you know, all those questions that, you know, you don't necessarily feel comfortable doing, but you have to be direct, because a lot of times they're not going to tell you.
Right.
And a lot of times people don't want to ask because they feel like if I say something, it's going to make them want to go and do
into
it.
their heads.
Oh, sure, that
Right.
it's going to give them the idea.
Right.
But we've
But
discovered that's a myth.
That's a myth.
That is a myth. It's not true at all, because they've already got it in their head, whether they're going to or not. So it's very important that we be direct, that we are there for them to have that discussion with, because a lot of times all they need is somebody just to listen to them.
And recognizing that, you know, when we dance around the issue, when we say, how are you doing? And someone says, oh, I'm fine. You know, you have to be more direct than that. And we want to accept that as an answer. We want to believe that the people we love and that our neighbors are doing okay. And, you know, even if we suspect that something might be off, you know, we're like, well, I asked how they were doing. They would tell me if something was wrong. No, they don't. Because remember, it goes back to what Karmen had said earlier, in that they feel like it's a burden. They feel like what they are experiencing is a burden to their family and to their friends, and they don't want to burden people with their problems, as most of us feel. And so, you know, when somebody asks you how you're doing, you don't typically open up and say, well, I've been having thoughts about suicide lately. And so it's only when you don't accept fine as an answer, when you don't accept, oh, I'm doing okay, you know, trust your gut, trust your instincts. And as Karmen said, be very direct. And, you know, if you suspect that there's a risk of suicide there, or you suspect that somebody is at risk for it, saying, are you thinking about suicide, as Karmen said.
So then after we've done that, after we have said, you know, and just again, been direct and said, are you thinking about suicide? The next step that the Be the One campaign talks about is be there. What does that look like as a friend or family member? What does it mean to be there?
So basically being there means that you've had that conversation, you've opened up the dialogue, and then, you know, be there to listen to them, not to judge them, not to give them advice, but just to be there, listen, help find them, you know, what they need. Also, don't commit to anything that you are not able to follow through with, because you need to build that trust. And they're trusting that you're going to be there for them. So if you set a time to check in on them, make sure that they're getting checked on, whether it be you, a family member, a neighbor, somebody. But make sure you're following through with those things, and just make sure they understand that you are there for them.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's very isolating. To feel this way, it's very isolating, because you are convinced that you're the only one that kind of is experiencing this. It's a very, you know, not intentional, but, you know, it's a very kind of egocentric sort of perspective, because it encompasses every aspect of their lives. And so they have a hard time seeing reality as it is, as far as those supports go. And oftentimes they're going to push people away, because, again, they feel like it's a burden. They feel like, you know, nobody wants to hear about my problems. So you invite them to a birthday party, they don't show up, because they're like, no one wants me there anyway. I'll just be a party pooper. You know, I'll just bring everybody down. And so, you know, that's recognizing that if somebody has typically been there, you know, for the majority of events across time, you know, and suddenly they're not showing up anymore, being able to go and know that is a warning sign, but also, as Karmen said, making sure that you're following up, and if you commit to something, committing to it, not letting them push you away. You know, they'll say, I don't need, you know, people will kind of give them an out sometimes. So they say, well, I can come and check on you at this time, or I'll come by and visit, you know, we can have some coffee tomorrow. And then they'll call and they'll say, you still up for coffee? And the person will say, no, I'm doing all right. Don't worry about it. And then we just kind of, you know, fade into the background, not doing that. You know, if we commit to showing up and having a cup of coffee, show up. Don't give them an out. Don't give them an option to say, no, don't come over.
Yeah, so stop being polite and say, you know what, I really need that cup of coffee today.
Yes, exactly. Force your way into the room.
Yeah. Absolutely. So step number 3 is keep them safe. That one feels a little bit overwhelming. So how do I, as a friend or family member, do my part to keep them safe? What does that look like?
So the biggest thing to remember that is, once you have had that conversation and you find out that someone truly is feeling suicidal or that they want to take their life, the first thing you have to do is do not leave them by themselves. Absolutely. I said they will be fine as long as you are there. But as soon as you leave, if they're that critical, they will wait until you are gone. So make sure that you do not leave them. Make sure you're calling 911, you're getting help, whatever it takes to keep them safe and to make sure that they get to places where they need to be as far as getting those resources that they need in order to work through these things. Because a lot of times people don't realize that in the moment and leading up to that moment, it's not necessarily that these people want to die. They really don't want to die. They just want to end the emotional pain or the physical pain that they're experiencing. Mm-hmm. And they don't have any other way. They can't think of any other way to fix it. And so they truly don't want to die. So as long as you are there keeping them safe until you can get them some help, it could mean the difference between life and death.
And don't feel like if you're direct and you say, are you thinking about suicide, and someone says yes, that doesn't mean you have to go into immediate overload and it's like, okay, I need to call 911 right now. That's why it's important to understand those questions and ask those follow-up questions. And so what we look for as providers too is, have we had these thoughts in the last month? Have we had these thoughts in the last 48 hours? Have you had these thoughts in the last, 12 hours? And then, just beyond the thoughts, as Karmen was mentioning, what's the plan? Do you have a plan? And however many steps are involved in the plan, the more intricate the plan is, the more detailed the plan is, the higher the risk factors are going to be for successful completion of suicide. And so, recognizing that if they say, well, yeah, I'm going to do this, and yes, I've had those thoughts in the last 24, 48 hours, that automatically elevates your risk level there.
The other thing I want to mention with Keep Them Safe is, you talked a little bit about firearms in rural areas. If I have a friend or family member who says, I have a plan and this is it, et cetera, is it appropriate to ask, where are the firearms? Can you keep yourself safe from those things? Is that a step that we should take?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Or hoarding,
and it's honestly
pills.
Something that I have had to do is, if you have somebody that you find out that they are serious about it, and even if they don't have the plan with the gun, I would, ask them, is there anything that you have in your home that you could potentially harm yourself with?
Sure.
And they say, yeah, I've got some firearms and, I've got some knives and stuff.
I've got some old medication or whatever
okay.
it may be.
So is there somebody we can call to come and remove these from your home, at least right now? And then that way we know that you're safe, they're out of your reach, and we know that you're not going to have access to them just until you can get some help and to work through these issues so you're in a better place, and then you can possibly have them back.
And sometimes, I know we've gotten, this is how I keep myself, I live alone, this is how I keep myself feeling safe. And so sometimes it does take some brainstorming to figure out, okay, so what are some other ways we can keep you safe? Or, if they end up where it's not a situation where you have to take the firearm, are there things that we can do that sort of put some steps in between, being able to just grab that firearm and make that impulse decision? So if you actually have to go out and, let's say we're keeping the bullets in the garage, but we're keeping the gun in the house. And so you actually have to walk out to the garage and get the bullets and go back in. It's just sometimes that little separation that can make all the difference. If we know that somebody's, I know this seems silly, but if we know that somebody is planning to use their car, for example, as a means of suicide, can we make sure that we don't have a full tank of gas all the time, which is something that we look at, especially for older populations. We're like, well, make sure you're taken care of. Always have a full tank of gas. That's dangerous when you are suicidal and you plan to use your car because, the longer your car runs, the more risk we have of that being a successful suicide. Open up the windows in the garage if you have to, put some barriers in between. Do they have to park in the garage? Can you put some boxes or something in the garage if they're comfortable not parking their car in the garage, so that they actually have to physically move something before they can pull the car in the garage. So these little things seem kind of silly, but at the same time, these are things that could save a life in the end.
They give you just enough of a pause, maybe.
Absolutely.
So step 4 of the Be the One to campaign is help them connect. And that can mean a lot of things. Mm-hmm. So what are some of those connections that we as a friend or a family member can help them make in these situations?
So basically with this help them connect action step, it's more about what resources are out there that we can help them connect with. So of course, recently our suicide prevention hotline number has changed. It went from a very long number that a lot of people couldn't remember off the top of their head to something very, very simple, 988. Very similar to 911, and everybody remembers that. So they went with the 988 number. So you can actually call or text that 988 and you will be connected with somebody to help you. Also, there's a crisis text line, and you can just text to 741-741, and that will also get you connected with someone. You can go into 988lifeline.org and be able to chat with someone. And then the VA also has lines, crisis lines for those veterans out there that are struggling as well. And of course, their first one is the 988, press 1, and you'll be connected. And then they have their own crisis text line, which is 838-255. These are all things to help them connect. The other things that you can do that is more getting them somewhere. So, of course, the first thing you want to do is if they are seriously in a crisis and, 988's not working and those text lines aren't working and things like that, that it's not helping them through this, then, of course, we want to make sure they get to the emergency room so that they can get some proper care. So, of course, you'd be calling 911.
Right. And I think, having conversations about, if they have worked with a therapist in the past, is that an option? Let's get them back into therapy. If they haven't, what resources, like Senior Life Solutions, for example, what opportunities are out there in the community or in the surrounding communities to connect them with professionals, but also with peers, with others that are experiencing maybe that same struggle, but just connection in general. And, I think a lot of times it, like I said, feels very isolating for people that are going through this. And so connection, we know, is one of the major healers for, depression. And it's important to recognize that depression kind of tells us we don't want to do that. And so it convinces us that we don't want to connect with people. It convinces us not to socialize and go out. And so making sure that we do the opposite of what, depression and anxiety tell us to do. And that is, if we don't feel like getting out of bed, we need to get out of bed. If we don't feel like getting dressed, we need to get dressed. If we don't feel like going to that party, we need to go to that party. Because connecting with people in general is a natural healer and booster of our mood and our outlook. Connecting with something bigger than yourself. So whether it's spirituality, being in nature, connecting with animals, could they get a pet? A pet is an often, amazing source of purpose because you have to take care of the pet and then you have to walk the pet. So you also get out, you get some exercise, but you have something that will provide you with unconditional love. And that's a big deal. So that connection, with whether it's nature, pets, church, community organizations, volunteerism, volunteering and doing an act of service is one of the fastest and biggest boost we can get for our mental health and our mood. And so making sure that, we are offering all those opportunities or exploring all those opportunities with our loved ones and with our friends so that they really can get outside of that isolated kind of mindset.
So the last step here in the Be the One to campaign is follow up. That's kind of self-explanatory, but let's talk about it a little bit. So what does that following up look like for a friend or a family member?
So basically, once a person has received help, maybe they've gone to counseling, they've gone to an inpatient mental health facility just to help them work through things and have gone back home, whatever the situation may be, that's the time when you really need to reach back out to that person and just check in on them. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Is there anything else I can help with? Is there any other resources that you need? Maybe you need to go back to one of these other action steps because maybe they still need help and maybe you need to help them reconnect again. So this is a time for you to kind of assess where they're at as far as that recovery and to see if they need further steps taken.
And you can also do, in the meantime, a little research to see what is available to them in the community, and then go back and say, hey, since the last time we talked, I came across this group that's running. Cass is, you guys are very fortunate here in Atlanta that you have a lot of activities and groups that run through the local library that, are available for individuals to participate in, and, are not just at the library, but there's a lot of groups, there's a lot of organizations, especially as the pandemic kind of winds down, things open back up. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and so take some time once you walk away from that. Do a little research, reach out to whether it's your own provider or whether it's online, you're doing some searches, or
you can always check it on the website for the chamber to see what events are coming up in the community to be a part of, get yourself out there and stay connected.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of resources available that and folks you can talk to that can provide you with some of those resources, and then take those back to your friend or your family member and say, hey, have you thought about this?
So following up with more ways to connect.
Exactly.
Wow, great. In those emergency situations, it is a true crisis. They have been thinking about suicide within the last 12 to 24 hours. They have a plan. We think that they are at immediate danger and risk. What's the appropriate next step?
Calling 911, getting them to the emergency room, getting them help.
Because they aren't likely, at that point when they are that committed, they might still reach out on their own, but the likelihood of them doing that goes down the more committed they become. And so I think, And if they're going to be mad at you, they're going to be mad at you. You could have saved their life, and I think that's where a lot of people hesitate, and they're like, "Oh, I don't want to embarrass them," or what if they're not really that serious? And you can't second guess yourself in that way, because when it's too late, when it happens, it's too late. And I would much rather that a friend or a family member be angry with me because I tried to save their life than failing to save their life.
Interesting. Again, parallels to other health issues.
Right.
We hear the same thing about patients who are having heart attacks. Well, it's probably not a heart attack. I don't really need to go to the emergency room. It's probably fine, blah, blah, blah. Again, that idea of I don't want to burden anyone.
Right.
So, you have to be the one to say,
right, I'm taking you.
I'm
or
still taking you.
in.
We're still going in.
And I think
you want to be upset with me later? Okay,
right.
That's fine.
Yeah, and as a family member, I think we're more likely to do that with physical health issues than we are with mental health, because of the stigma. And so that's why it is so important to change your perspective, change your mindset on mental health. It is an organ. Your brain is an organ like anything else.
And like I had said earlier, we need to reframe that thought.
Yes.
We need to reframe the way we think about mental health. And everybody has mental health. A lot of people think of it as the bipolar, schizophrenics. But the thing is we all have mental health, every single one of us, regardless. This person might struggle with depression, anxiety, and the next person is very happy and satisfied in their life. Even that person that's satisfied, that is their mental health.
Yeah.
Their mental health is well, where this person with depression is struggling. So it's all mental health.
And to also, to that fact, you don't have to have depression to be at risk for suicide. And so, a lot of times they're like, when we think about people who are at risk for suicide, again, we think about people who are barely functioning, who are very low, very depressed, we can observe that there's something going on there and it's noticeable. And really, those aren't the folks that slip through the system. Those, folks that are able to laugh and put a smile on, it's easy to slap a smile on our face and to hide what's going on underneath. And so a lot of times, that's where the shock comes in, is we hear somebody committed suicide and we're like, I just talked to them. They were doing fine. They weren't doing fine, but they were good at pretending they were doing fine. Or, we never gave them the opportunity. We never gave them that direct question. We never explored a little deeper to make sure that, when I said I was doing fine, that there wasn't more being, below the surface there. And so I think it's important to recognize just because someone is laughing and joking around does not mean that they are okay. And so you have to ask, you have to explore that deeper.
So a good message to us all to be vulnerable, to ask those uncomfortable questions, to share our struggles, to dig a little deeper with their friends and family when they say things like, oh, I'm fine. So will the Be the One to campaign, again, those are ask, be there, keep them safe, help them connect, follow up. great steps. I can't thank you guys enough for being here.
Thank you.
This is such an important topic, and I appreciate all that you were doing out in the community.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ann.